Coming up today on LinkedIn News Live. How can companies make better skill-based hires? And what does that mean for those who've earned or who are earning new certifications during this tumultuous year? Plus, we speak with the CEO of Nextdoor on how the pandemic has affected how people think about community. All that next. Hello, I'm Caroline Fairchild, and welcome to LinkedIn News Live, where the business conversation begins with you. It's March 30th, and here's a quick look at the top headlines trending right now on LinkedIn. New Yorkers are returning to the city. Markets rattled by big trading bet. And 30 million people acquired digital skills during COVID-19. Let's take a deeper look into that story. Microsoft, LinkedIn's parent company, announced it's helped 30 million people in 249 countries gain access to digital skills as the pandemic caused professionals across industries to seek certifications for the most in-demand roles. Earlier this morning, I sat down with LinkedIn CEO Ryan Roslansky, as well as Microsoft President Brad Smith, to break down just how the two companies are doing that. All right, Brad and Ryan, thank you so much for joining us on LinkedIn News Live. This is a big announcement. Microsoft and LinkedIn are announcing that they're going to help 250,000 companies make a skill-based hire next year. Brad, I'll start with you. What is a skill-based hire? What does that mean?
Well, I think a skills-based hire, as Ryan knows, I think probably better than anybody, is a decision that a company can make to hire somebody based on an assessment of the skills they bring to the job, rather than, say, more traditionally, the other academic credentials that might appear or jobs that people have held in the past. It really requires that people not just be able to get skills, but document the skills they have, and that companies basically be better trained so recruiters can evaluate these skills and base their decisions on them.
And Ryan, this is a trend that we've been discussing for some time here at LinkedIn. For so long, the jobs that you got were based on who you knew, maybe the college that you went to, the industry that you were in. Why does that need to change right now, particularly at this point in the pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's just a natural evolution of, the job marketplace, where at the end of the day, you have people looking for a job and you have a job to be done. If you go back maybe 25 years ago, the way that would happen, you would find a job in a newspaper classified, or maybe a sign in a window or a local job fair. And jobs were largely hidden, not because anyone was trying to hide them. There wasn't really a mechanism to kind of bring them up anywhere to be viewed. And then that changed with kind of online job boards becoming available. Jobs became visible. 2004, LinkedIn launched, and that really made people visible. So the last 15 years have really been about, you have jobs visible, you have people visible, and how you make that connection to ensure that people are connecting to opportunity in the right way. And we see millions of conversations every day on LinkedIn that often start with vague job descriptions, or conversations between a recruiter and a job seeker that start with, what is your degree or what is your experience, instead of really focusing on what it takes to do the job, the skills that are needed. So we recognized, and understanding this and looking at this marketplace, that we need to further expand the way people can access jobs, help employers find and hire new people, diverse teams. And that's what we call skills-based hiring, finding alternative and flexible and accessible paths to help people find those paying jobs. And to your point, it's really been accelerated through COVID.
Well, that's great.
Sorry. I mean, just a great example of this, and we talk about it a lot because it's just so tangible and real, is the idea that, many people on LinkedIn who have food server roles, they've been food servers and they're now really out of work on one hand. On the other hand, we see a lot of demand for customer service roles, people who are looking to hire people to join their organizations in customer service. And it turns out the average food server on LinkedIn has 70% of the skills you need to be a customer service agent. So our ability to find that and focus on the skills and help connect people to the skills they need to find the opportunities is really what this is all about.
And Brad, that's really where Microsoft comes into play as well with LinkedIn in terms of connecting people to these skills. What does that look like? How does that tangibly get done at a scale of, say, 30 million skills or 250,000 companies making these hires?
Well, the first thing that I'm really pleased with is the fact that Ryan and I last June said that our companies would seek to reach 25 million people worldwide, and we've now reached more than 30 million. And I think that just underscores the global reach of technology and the global reach that our companies have. What it really means in tangible forms here is that we'll continue to foster what we started last year with lots of free learning content on LinkedIn Learning and Microsoft Learn, more continuing work with nonprofit partners, which have just been critical to really expand the sense of digital equity, to reach communities of color, to help women and people with disabilities who in many ways have borne the brunt of this pandemic. And I think one of the other things it means is that we are really pulling on all of the different assets across our companies. I think of all of this as something where LinkedIn is really at the center for all of Microsoft, and it is driving all of us forward with the approach that you just heard Ryan describe. But we have the ability across Microsoft to supplement that with our skills-based training that really starts at a very early age with things like Minecraft, to the programs that we have in high schools now to help people learn to code and master computer science skills, to really lifelong learning, including in the workplace itself, with the kinds of applications that Microsoft is creating. So, together we really are, I think, at the forefront of creating a new ecosystem that fundamentally creates more opportunities for people to gain the skills they need to advance their careers.
And to some of Brad's points, Ryan, one of the bigger questions that I have reading through this announcement is, are employers buying this? This requires almost a complete rethink to how we think about hiring people, almost a different language. What are you hearing on the ground right now in terms of how employers can implement this at scale, particularly at this crisis point that we're at in the economy?
Yeah, I think employers everywhere are trying to figure out how they find talent in real time for the roles that they need in the ever-changing landscape. So they're searching for those tools and that ability to better understand how to match talent opportunity. For us, and a part of this big program and launch today, is the idea that not everyone is actually speaking the same language to begin with. People describe skills proficiencies in many different ways, in many different languages across the board. What we're trying to do is help democratize that under a skills taxonomy where everyone's going to be speaking the same language. Companies can use this skills taxonomy that had been proprietary at LinkedIn for a long time based on the data that we have to better understand how to describe roles, better understand where supply and demand exists, and use that for things like job descriptions, internal talent marketplaces, et cetera. Similarly, educational institutions, schools, online training can use that same taxonomy to start creating coursework that matches that talent to that opportunity as well. So we're seeing a lot of demand from companies who are looking for LinkedIn to help better connect talent opportunity, not only through skills, but through accessing new and diverse talent pools, or moving to a more efficient way to find talent, bringing people into the company quicker. And a lot of what we're talking about here is laying the ground to do that moving forward.
And let's double click a little bit, Brad, into diverse talent and making sure that there's equitable opportunities. A lot of these emerging fields, I'm thinking AI, I'm thinking cloud computing, I'm thinking data, they've traditionally gone to a specific type of worker with a specific type of background. What are Microsoft and LinkedIn doing to make sure that employers are thinking more diversely about the talents that they are putting into these positions, which are accelerating rapidly?
Well, I think it really comes down to two things. The first is the part that Ryan just talked about, which I would just underscore. I think there are a few things that will be more impactful than enabling employers around the world and people to speak the same language so they can recognize the skills that are needed and recognize the people who have them. I just think that's a game changer for the entire skilling market globally. But then the second part of this really is the piece that reaches beyond our companies, and specifically to the partnerships with the nonprofits of the world. I think one of the real insights from the last 8 months of work has been the power of the kinds of skilling tools that we create, coupled with the mentoring, the wraparound services, the coaching that are provided for people who work in nonprofits and who then assist women, people of color, people with perhaps a lower income, or people with disabilities. And what we're finding is that these people are enormously talented. They have a huge appetite to learn. They're committed to advancement. But with that combination of, say, technology and assistance from people, yeah, they're going to town. I mean, they are taking course after course. They're making it through learning pathways. We're now in a position, I think, with these partners to help these people land new jobs. And I think that's one of the things that, frankly, is really inspiring for all of us who've had the chance to see this work firsthand.
And Ryan, I definitely appreciate the optimistic view that Brad just shared there, but it's been a challenging year, and LinkedIn's job is to connect people to opportunity, like you said, and a lot of those opportunities have gone by the wayside. As CEO, I want to know kind of what keeps you up at night, what makes you optimistic about the direction that we're going, particularly with this announcement?
It's funny, Caroline, it's both what keeps me up and what makes me optimistic is understanding that through COVID, there has been a real shift in the underlying, labor market, where people can find jobs, where talent exists. And it's incumbent upon LinkedIn to first and foremost help people understand where that shift is occurring, help you understand where the future roles are going to be, help companies understand where the future talent is going to be, and then connect that talent at massive scale. And look, this is day one on what I think is a very exciting vision for a skills first future. Things aren't going to get better overnight, but it's these types of moves that we're making. It's this type of just really understanding the supply demand imbalance, the skills in the middle, and how to connect talent to opportunity to help companies, find diverse talent, to help employees find roles that they didn't know existed, which is really exciting to me moving forward.
And Brad, we often have many job seekers joining us on LinkedIn News Live looking for those opportunities right now. What's your message to them? Any insights from your career or anything that's different? Say, maybe you were looking for a job during the online job boards phase that Brian walked us through earlier on in the show. What's different now? Where should they be looking for jobs?
Well, the number one piece of advice I'd give to anybody, and frankly to all of us, is I do think this is a time to act with a sense of urgency. It's been an extraordinary period of time. We've all seen that firsthand. To some degree, the economy has been sustained with technology, and to some degree, it's been through massive amounts of public spending. And this pandemic will come to an end. The economy will readjust. The amounts of stimulus spending that we're seeing today will eventually diminish. This is the time for people to really focus on what they want to do with their future, and not just think about it, but act. And the one thing that everybody can do is add to your skills base. I think there's a really interesting insight that comes from the learning pathways that have been the most popular on LinkedIn as part of our skills initiative. They're frankly skills that are broad, that will help you with any job you might want to pursue. Soft skills, there's the LinkedIn learning pathway around that. There's the pathway around diversity and inclusion and belonging. There's the pathway around digital transformation. So I would really recommend that you use this time, skill up across horizontally, and then add to that a focus on the kind of specific job that you think may be of most interest to you. And put LinkedIn's new features to use. Be at the forefront of that. That's how you'll grab people's attention before others. One of the things that I think is really interesting is this new cover story feature that LinkedIn is launching. Ryan can talk a little bit about that, but this is a chance, especially as the functionality of that is built out over the first couple of months. Be on the forefront of using that kind of feature to share more of yourself with the kinds of employers that you would like to have get to know you.
Well, you heard it here first on LinkedIn News Live. There's a lot of uncertainty out there, but there are a lot of actions that you can take right now to be prepared for whatever the labor market throws us moving forward. Ryan, Brad, thanks so much for joining us on LinkedIn News Live.
Thank you.
That was Ryan Roslansky, CEO of LinkedIn, and Brad Smith, president of Microsoft. All right, there's nothing quite like a global pandemic to remind people of the importance of community. And our next guest had a front seat to how this crisis has changed how people view their neighbors. Sarah Friar is the CEO of Nextdoor, a platform founded in 2010 to connect people to those who live close to them. Nextdoor has seen massive growth since sheltering in place began last year and now is available in over 270,000 neighborhoods across 11 countries. Sarah joins us now live. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
I said this before we started talking live on the show. I've been looking forward to speaking with you all year. I've just watched as my use of Nextdoor has changed so dramatically with this pandemic. But let's go back. Let's go back. It's been about a year since the pandemic began. I want to know, when was the moment that you realized that this crisis was going to have a huge impact on your business?
Sure. So actually, I think it was even earlier than maybe the US was realizing a crisis was happening. Nextdoor is in 11 countries. And so actually what we started to see was in Europe, particularly Italy, this beginning wave of people shifting quickly to the platform. And look, we know what happens. Like, Nextdoor is the app where you plug into the neighborhoods that matter to you. And in times of crisis, we are great for trusted information, for giving and getting help, and for building those real world connections. So even though we were sheltering in place, suddenly it was the people who were right next door that mattered so much more than perhaps our colleagues at work or our family that might live, right the way across the world. So very quickly, we saw the rise in activity on the platform. And then we saw that effectively come from Italy into countries like the UK, came to the US, and then countries like Australia and Canada, probably a little bit more towards the tail end, but ultimately everyone ended up in the same place. It was a global pandemic.
And that rise in activity, what does that look like on your end? How were you alerted to it? How did your company respond once they saw that things were shifting in terms of what people were looking for on the platform?
Sure. So immediately we see a lift in daily active users. In fact, we saw an almost 80% lift just week over week about this time last year, which is a huge surge. The first thing we see is people looking for information. So they wanted to know, what are the most critical, real-time, trusted sources? And so we were working to make sure that those were being highlighted right at the top of the newsfeed. So think the CDC, the WHO, if you were in the UK, the National Health Service. We also worked really closely with a lot of public agencies. So folks like California's Governor Newsom, Governor Raimondo in Rhode Island, Mayor Khan in London, all of these folks who needed to make sure those messages were getting out real time to their constituents. The second thing I'd flag was back to help. I always say, in a time of crisis, right, if there's a massive flood going down your street, you put your hand out and grab that person in the water, and you don't have to think who they are, what do they do? Are they like me? Are they part of my tribe? It is a human reaction to say, I am going to help. So we created a help map and a series of help groups to allow people to both offer help, and then actually some of the harder thing is getting more vulnerable people to want to accept that help. But very quickly, we saw that neighbors rose to the occasion. And then finally, local businesses. So we all know they've been devastated by this pandemic. We could see how much neighbors want to shop local. They want to help. It goes beyond just getting the product. They want to make sure that you are in business. My local restaurant, Holly and Dan, are my neighbors. I've known them since our kids were in preschool together. So I have a really vested interest in their business. Beyond the fact they make great food, I want to make sure they stick around because they're a big part of what makes my neighborhood special to me. And we saw that across the world.
Yeah, it was heartwarming from my perspective. I'm in a community in Brooklyn on Nextdoor, and just seeing that massive outpouring of help, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic, was a respite during just a terrible time right now. Sure. I'm going to go ahead, speaking of community, say hello to some members who are joining us in the stream right now. We have Sharman from Washington. Hi, Sharman. Roxana from Hawaii. Kyle from Texas, and Nancy from North Carolina. Thanks for joining us on LinkedIn News Live. I'm here with Sarah Friar. She's the CEO of Nextdoor. One of my fun facts about Sarah is that her title on LinkedIn is Chief Neighbor. So that tells you a little glimpse into how a community is important to her. But we want to hear from you too. If you have questions for Sarah on how she's led Nextdoor through this crisis, how the platform has changed, let us know in the stream and we'll get those questions answered on the show today. Sarah, like any social platform that launches back in 2010, there were a lot of naysayers who were questioning the value of this platform, who really couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel, the importance of being connected to those who are physically closest to you. How have you seen that change in terms of the types of users that are coming to Nextdoor? What are the naysayers saying now?
Yeah, so you're right. If you think about it, people often will say, but we've never been more connected. And that's true, because we all have our head in these devices. And yes, we can talk to people literally in real time on the other side of the world. And yet we know societally that we've never actually been more disconnected. And there's been this rise in the epidemic of loneliness. Our new Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, actually wrote a whole book about this. And so as we went out and did our research, we could see that people were saying, I don't actually know a single neighbor. The Pew Research actually says about 28% of people didn't know a single neighbor. But of course, we know that you make a lot of friendships in your neighborhood. I was reading a journal article last week that actually called out that almost 36% of people say they're most likely to find a friendship in their neighborhood. So the zeitgeist has changed. I mean, that's what's been great. I no longer feel like I need to stand in front of everyone and explain the why, because people are just getting it. And it is changing the complexion of the platform. I see teenagers coming on Nextdoor right now, finding their first job, very appropriate for LinkedIn, as you think about it. It's the first rise of the workforce. I saw a lot of high school students and college students who were stuck at home, expected to be off living their best life at their new college potentially, and now we're home with parents. And again, they were using Nextdoor as an outlet, frankly, a way to be there in their communities at a time of need. We see millennial parents coming to the platform, trading stories about homeschooling. A lot of people were actually offering the use of printers because we hadn't really thought about the fact that we'd have to print homework out and then share it. And then, of course, we see a lot of the older generation too, right, who often feel left out from technology. But Nextdoor has proven to be a very kind of welcoming, easy to use platform. And it's given them a way to reconnect, often if they've lost a spouse, maybe they've lost dear friends, but they're finding in their communities new ways to be part of that community again.
So I think it was about a couple months ago that my husband brought up the idea that we should buy a printer, and I quickly shot that down. So maybe I'll send him to Nextdoor to see if there's one that he can use safely in your neighborhood at this time during the crisis. Sarah, I think it's so interesting what you just said about just the shortage of people who actually know one of their neighbors personally. It's interesting to me, but it's not shocking. Connect to us a little bit the mental health crisis that we're seeing in this country, and just that fact that there is this disconnective tissue between us and those who are physically closest to us.
Yeah, and it's not just this country. This epidemic of loneliness is something actually I felt very personally. When I joined Nextdoor, one of my goals was to travel the world and literally go to every country that we were in. And I was shocked that in every country where I kind of stopped in, met with neighbors, this topic of loneliness would come up. Maybe a divorcee, a new mom, a new dad stuck at home for the first time with a young child, an older person losing a spouse. So it was kind of across the gamut of society. We did some research collectively across the US, the UK, and Australia with literally the world-renowned researchers on this topic, led by Dr. Julianne Holt-Lunstad out of BYU. And what we found is that it's as simple as knowing just 6 neighbors. If you know 6 neighbors, it has a statistically significant impact on your ability to have a much more positive mental attitude and to be able to deal with issues like loneliness, social anxiety, and even COVID worries, believe it or not. And how you can start it is just with a small act of kindness. And it doesn't have to be some big thing you go do. It might be saying hello on the street. It might be picking up a newspaper and throwing it up onto someone's stoop. It might be maybe you just buy someone that coffee as you stand in line at the local coffee shop. Of course, socially distanced. But there's just really easy first steps we can all take to start building those bonds back. And that's a big part of what Nextdoor is about. How do we bring you together in a more virtual setting and build social trust because your husband shows up to use my printer, but then we see each other in real life and we begin that connection, that social capital build. We say, come for the utility, stay for the community.
Well, don't make that offer. He's probably watching right now. He's going to run over to wherever you are right now to use that printer. He misses his. It's not something that I miss at all. And now I'm doing kind of a mental check in my head. Just know if I know 6 neighbors, I think I know 5. So I have some work to do.
Easy to do.
Yeah, I like some of your tips. I like the paper throwing. That's something that I can do quite easily. Sarah, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about you as a leader. These are tremendous challenges that Nextdoor is trying to chip away at during a really challenging time for a lot of people. What has been your biggest challenge leading the company through this crisis?
So I think when I think of leadership, the two words that spring to mind constantly for me are transparency and empathy. And I think as you go into any crisis, it really helps if you have a culture of transparency. When people are concerned, when they're going through a crisis, when perhaps they are not reacting to things the way they would when their stress levels are lower, they can almost fill in the message or fill in things that actually are not there at all. And that's where transparency really helps you. Because if you've built that trust in your company, if people know that you're going to really share and all the comms are going to be out there, good and bad, that's a great starting point. And that's something we do a lot at Nextdoor, whether it's through our all hands. I regularly do coffee chats with cross sections of the team. I'm known to pop up in people's team meetings. I even have done a book club, believe it or not, all ways to just stay very connected and make sure I'm communicating in a one-to-one way, in a small group way, and then ultimately at a company level. And then empathy. You cannot not have empathy for your customers and build a successful company, in my opinion. And so how do you get that empathy? Well, I had been doing it in real life. So I had been going to Australia or France or Amsterdam or wherever I would show up and doing roundtables, literally breaking bread with bunches of neighbors to find out what they needed, what was the help they wanted from Nextdoor, what else should we be building. So of course, COVID hit. It was a little hard to do that in real life. And so I've set up my own virtual series where every month I do a roundtable with neighbors. Usually I pick a country. So I just did one with Australia 2 months ago. I did the UK last month. And again, it's a great way to hear a cross section of what's going on in neighborhoods. Like the folks who are very, the real neighborhood activists, they're looking for a platform that allows them to say, create a group and really go out and help the elderly, for example. Or I've seen in Australia, a woman come around. She originally was doing it as a lunch for singles. She'd gotten divorced. And she just started to do it virtually. And she's actually had 2 marriage proposals, believe it or not, in her group. So
wow,
even a dating site.
What a fun story. So those 2 leadership traits that you just called out, transparency, empathy. If you just took me back to 2019, I think those were traits that came up in maybe 10% of my interviews. Now they come up in almost 100%. It's almost like a 180 in terms of what employees are looking to for leaders and what leaders are having to portray right now. What does that shift signal to you in terms of how you think about yourself as a leader and what this means for how CEOs think moving forward their relationship with their company?
Yeah, it's interesting because they're skills that actually often gender, not to be gender stereotypical, but are often associated with women leaders as well. And of course, we know there's still a huge missing gap of women in senior leadership roles. I think it's only 6% of the Fortune 50 have female CEOs, which is pretty diabolical. We can do better. And so I actually think the fact that these skills are now being valued and we can see how well companies can perform, right? Our company is much more efficient today than I think we were a year ago. And I think part of it is because we are trusting people, setting goals appropriately, but then trusting people to get that work done as they are able to fit it around their life. That comes back to, as we're all communicating, there's trust that we're still going to hit the goal, but you don't have to micromanage someone in real life in an office setting. And then going back to the empathy point, I think we all as leaders have had to be much more open to what's going on holistically for our employee base. I actually think that's a great outcome because you start to understand people as people, not just as employees that perhaps, that you only see on a spreadsheet. And with that, I think you're actually able to really help them grow in their careers. One question I always ask in every interview is, where do you want to be in 3 years? Because that's actually my most important job. Because if I get you there, that means you'll have done awesome things for Nextdoor. You'll have grown amazingly as an individual and as a colleague, and you'll love it. You'll stay and you'll do more and more great work. So I think having to get to know people with that deep empathy is a huge unlock. And I hope we all remember to keep it front of mind, even as we slowly return to an office setting.
That is actually one of the biggest paradoxes of this pandemic to me. We're all speaking through these those who are fortunate enough to work from home are speaking and working through these digital spheres right now. And yet a lot of people are realizing that their employees are people. So I'm glad that you made that point, Sarah. And you sound like a great mentor. I wish that you were one of mine. That seems like a great question to be asking to your employees. We have
one more thing I'd say. It's so cool, isn't it, when someone's kid comes into one-on-one. You're in this very serious work conversation and suddenly there's a 3-year-old in the midst, or the dog starts barking. Like, again, I just think these moments are so beautiful that we have to hold tight to them. And it goes back to next door, right? Everything can feel very, antiseptic almost in a virtual environment. And you go out into your community, it's gritty, it's real, it's vibrant. It's why we love living there.
Yeah, and those kids and those dogs definitely make it a little bit more vibrant, all those Zoom meetings that we find ourselves in all day. Sarah, you mentioned return to work. The vaccine is rapidly rolling out at a faster clip, at least here in the United States. What's top of mind for you as a leader as you think about returning to an office setting, at least, part of the time?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, just on the vaccine front, that's very top of mind, not just for my employees, but more importantly, for Nextdoor's role out there in the world, right? The vaccine can leave a lot of people confused, unsure of where they can go for answers. And so it's something they often turn to their neighbors for advice or even just help, right? It's great that, Rite Aid has a site where you can sign up for your appointment for your vaccine. But what if you can't drive to get there, right? That's a classic place where kind of neighbors add the editorial on top and make the whole thing happen. As we think about coming back to work at Nextdoor, we really want to lead again with, first of all, what's the best thing for our company? What is going to maintain some of the great things we've learned through COVID, and not lose all of that and just fall back to the way it was before? So what I've noticed is, one, people are more efficient. We used to have a lot of developers, engineers who would drive maybe an hour plus to come to the office, and the first thing we'd buy them were noise canceling headphones. I mean, that is beyond a sign of madness, frankly. And now they're able to work from home in a very calm, quiet environment, or at least some of them. And so how do we exactly, maybe not with the 3-year-old and the dog, but they're definitely in an environment where they can concentrate. And so I think keeping some of that very good. That said, we are a platform that is all about coming together virtually so we can create connective tissue to be in real life. And we really want to see people shift from online to offline. And so I think it would be disingenuous to then be a company that we ourselves are only virtual. And we've missed that creativity. Like, there's a serendipity, the kind of classic water cooler moment where either you meet someone in the kitchen and you're immediately exchanging a product idea, or you made the point about mentoring and coaching. I think there is a miss for a lot of people coming up in their careers if they just don't get to be in that kind of apprenticeship mode of watching and learning, not just being told what you do to kind of take it to the next level in your career.
Well, I'm certainly excited to return to the office, at least part-time, for some of those special moments that I certainly feel like are missing in this pandemic. Thank you so much for joining us on LinkedIn News Live. I'm such a fan of the work that you're doing, and we really appreciate you coming on the show.
Really appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Great show.
That was Sarah Friar. She's the CEO of Nextdoor. All right, tomorrow on LinkedIn News Live, we're taking a deep dive into the world of Hollywood and their diversity problems by following the money trail. We take a look at a groundbreaking study and examine ways entertainment and media can be more representative. I'm Caroline Fairchild. Thanks for joining us on LinkedIn News Live.